Hello and welcome to Channel's Book Club. My name is Olakunle Kasumo and it's always exciting to be on this show where we talk all things books. What a year 2023 has been. You know my usual question. How many books have you read this year? If you've not read a book this year, tick-tock, time is ticking. I always recommend read a book a month. If you do a book a month, that will keep you going. That's a really decent target when it comes to reading. Just one book in a month. If you don't read a book a month, what's happening? Whatever it takes, just get a book to read. And like I always said, there's a book out there for everybody. You just need to find it. Find a book that fits into your interests, and then that will give you the energy to sustain the reading, even when things are not working out so well. Well, so get cracking on that. We've had quite a time this year, quite an exciting time this year. And I was just thinking back about some of the episodes we've had. We're so privileged here because our authors, when they come here, they say very profound things apart from the things that they've written. So you read their books and then you get to listen to them to explain why they wrote what they wrote. It's so exciting for us here. It's so exciting, and we learn so much. And I was just thinking about some of the authors we've had on the show, some of the guests we've had on the show, and some of the things they have said. One thing we hear constantly is, how do we get our kids reading? How do I get my son to read or my daughter to read? And our children are not reading and all that. And we had the additionals here not too long ago talking about what they did or what they do to get their children reading. Well, listen to what they said.
At that time, how we're raising our children, if we don't raise them better, we will not get what we wanted. Remember then I was teaching, and I said, no, something has to be done. They're not reading well. Something has to be done. They need some extra. School wasn't giving us what we needed. Exactly. We woke up when our first child was 7, and the next was 5, and the last was 3, around that time. And I said, this has to stop. TV has to stop. They can't spend all afternoons watching TV. They can't spend all day not getting anything extra apart from school assignments. And I say we really woke up. And what we decided was to go and charter books for them. And said, this is the culture in this house. No TV. So we turned off the TV.
Yeah. Let me add to that. Any process.
And you are saying this right now in a TV station.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. No, just kidding. It's fantastic.
Any process, when you want to think it through, starts with focus. So the first level of thinking is focus. So now our expectation is that there will be readers. So the focus is they should read. And when you're doing when you want to focus on a thing, you remove distractions. So TVs.
I think at first we bought 40
books.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then it got
but
to
they were
point,
exciting books. But it got to a point they were
we're not buying like 150 books, 200 books. I made it a commitment.
You were buying 200 books
month.
And that was why one of the things that helped us open up our house library to other children in the community.
Yes.
Children will spend time till like midnight reading.
Wait, let me get what you guys are saying. You were buying up to 100 books.
We did, believe me.
200 books every month.
So when your children saw so many books and all the distractions were removed, they didn't have a choice than to read, right?
That was the
they
only
don't have.
thing. Now they devoured the books.
Yeah, so each time we bring in books, it was like a party.
Very insightful. As promised, we're going to bring that couple back on the show soon, so look out. And we also had Anulika, who shared with us from the book titled The Fool's Guide to Business Startup. That title has always fascinated me over the years. You have all sorts of books with titles like that. A Fool's Guide to Cooking, A Fool's Guide to Dancing, A Fool's Guide to... it's just a fascinating title. A Fool's Guide to Business Startup. and there were a lot of things to learn. This is just a bit.
So many people want to start up a business and they're pretty much in limbo. They're wondering, what should I start? Something I've started, somebody else has done it before. So in this book, I really tell you, don't need to look far. A few basic things to go. For me, for example, as a lawyer, and I've asked a lot of lawyers, they even start a business that they do not know. They start doing, legal templates for their friends and their family, like we call it like private practice. And then some people, you can bake, you make cakes. In my case, one of my first businesses was event management. I used to go into like a wedding or a family gathering, and if it's disorganized, I'm already stressed. So I started to look around, I asked people around me. You would listen to people and they say, you are good at this, you're good at this, you do this easily. So I always say, start from there and make a list of the things that are coming to you and work your way from the top to the bottom.
We also had Simon Kolawole on the show, popular journalist, done so well in journalism. And he gave his book a title that I will consider to be always appropriate. Fellow Nigerians, it's all politics. What other book should you read in a year of politics in Nigeria? We've had politics from the beginning of the year, and we're still having politics till now. Politics in Nigeria. It can be so all-consuming. We've got other aspects of our national life, and we need to pay attention to them. But, politics is very key. Without politics, I don't think anything else works. But Simon's book, Fellow Nigerians, it's all politics. He had this to say, amongst other things. Why did you pick that title?
Yeah, I like to watch things from my balcony. I like to watch things over a period of time. And what I've discovered that when politicians fight or tell us they're doing something for the public good, or they're doing it for Nigeria to be better, to fight this, to fight that, after some time, I found out that actually they are being motivated by politics. Not most of the time, anyway, let me be fair. It's just motivated by politicking, not because anybody really cares about Nigeria. It's not as if they are doing it for the love of God. So when you are hearing people saying they want to rescue Nigeria, they want to change Nigeria, they want to revive Nigeria, they want to recover Nigeria, I tend to understand as just politics. So how do I win this election? How do I get elected? How do I get applause from the public?
Interesting. And there was Dare Oluwatuyi, Nigeria International Book Fair Trust, that is chairman. And he said a lot of things in the conversation we had with him. But I like the part where he reminded us of the oldest bookshop in Nigeria. Do you know the oldest bookshop in Nigeria? Well, if you watched that episode, you must have learnt about it. If not, here's what he had to say.
CSA Bookshop was founded in 1869.
1869?
1869.
Wow.
And that was by the colonial masters. And over the years, there has been so many changes. Initially, it was to distribute literature for the churches, even building materials that were needed to build the churches then. But later, they realized that they need to educate the people. And then schools started springing up. And then, so distributing materials for school, even material to also build the schools. And so over the years, then until independence, when the British had to leave, and then the administration of the Bookshop fell on Nigerians, and started to survive. But then the ownership was that of the Church of Nigerian, Anglican Communion. Who I would personally commend the church for keeping this the bookshop to today. It's the oldest bookshop in Nigeria, no doubt, and
1869. That's a
probably
long time.
the oldest in Africa, probably.
Wow.
So wherever I go outside Nigeria, I say they say, oh, no, they begin to see which one is the oldest in their country. So I will give kudos to Church of Nigeria Anglican Communion for keeping that business. They were not really after the the profit. Otherwise, the business probably would have died.
And talking about Nigerian history, you will have observed that on this show, we have this bias for Nigerian history. I love Nigerian history. No apologies. And I love to read books on Nigerian history. And people who know that I have this passion for Nigerian history always ask me, which books will you recommend? Which books on Nigerian history would you recommend? And I've had to answer this question many times. Because I've had to answer it many times, I decided some time ago to write a list of 21 books on Nigerian history that I will recommend to anybody to find and read. Of course, there are many other books on Nigerian history, and it's a bit difficult to say, these are the best books on Nigerian history. But I would say my 21 books are 21 books I highly recommend on Nigerian history. But let me share a few of them with you today. Time will not permit to share all the books on my list, but let me share with you maybe 2 or 3 as time will permit. The first on my list is The Story of Nigeria by Michael Crowder. You just have to read that book. No stories, just read this book. You have to. If you want to understand the history of Nigeria, you have to read this book. It was published in 1962. It is no longer in circulation. Somebody in government should get that book and reproduce it and put it in the hands of, every Nigerian that likes to read. So it's a very important book. It's very insightful. So many things you get to learn about Nigeria pre-independence, when Nigeria was conceived, long before the colonialists came here. When they came here, what happened, how was Nigeria negotiated, etc., up until independence. I remember this book was written in 1962, so just 2 years after independence. And it gets you to see and have an idea of the way people who were actively analyzing Nigeria at that time, and Michael Crowder was one of them, how they were thinking, how they viewed Nigeria, how they assessed Nigeria, and how they judged Nigeria. So get that book and read. It's an absolute must read. Another book on Nigerian history that I will recommend is titled Hubris. Hubris, Hubris. Hubris, A Brief Political History of the Nigerian Army. It was written by Akintunde Akinkumi. Now, Akinkumi is a lawyer, doctor, and soldier who served the British Army for decades. I've always said to him each time I've met him that you are the first person I will know who has combined those 3 professions: doctor, lawyer, and soldier. Now, this book is a gem. It talks about the history of the Nigerian Army. And the history of the Nigerian Army is in many ways the history of Nigeria. If you want to understand the history of Nigeria, you need to study the history of the Nigerian Army. And this book does justice to that. And there's so many interesting snippets and anecdotes. And you just have to read it. It captures the story of the Nigerian Army pre-1960. What was the motivation behind forming the army? And what was the role of the army initially? And how did that role evolve over the years? And what made soldiers intrude into the politics of Nigeria? And you know what happened. 1966 January, the first coup. 1966 July, the second coup. 1967, the Civil War that lasted till 1970. And we've had military dictatorship or rulership since 1966 up until 1979, when we had the Second Republic, and then the military came back in 1983, and then they left again in 1999. You know that story. So that whole thing is written in Hubris, and it weaves together all the intricacies, that make up the entire story. And like I said earlier, it is the story of Nigeria in many, many, many ways. Now, another book I will recommend, again, this has to do with the military, is titled Why We Struck by Adewale Ademoyega. This is a blockbuster book on Nigeria's first coup led by the famous 5 majors. You may have a different theory on the coup, I mean the first coup, whether or not it was an Igbo coup, you know, the debates. But it is a really fascinating read. I mean, this book, it's like a thriller. That January 1966 coup changed and shaped Nigeria post-independence. And the story is told in this fascinating book. It captures that story, and you just have to read it. You absolutely have to read it. It's a must read. And like I said, this is a book that when you are reading it, you're almost thinking, is this fiction? Am I reading fiction? It almost feels like fiction, but then you remember that it's not fiction. It happened to this country in January 1966. That coup changed everything. It changed the entire trajectory of Nigeria. Many still wonder, if that coup had not happened, where would Nigeria be today? Was that coup expedient? Was that coup ethnically or tribally motivated? There are so many questions around it. And we all know that that coup eventually led the country to a civil war in 1967. So that's another military-based book that you should read. Now, another one that I will recommend, controversial this was. It rocked the entire country in terms of how controversial it was. It was like the great legendary Chinua Achebe said, I'm going out with a bang. I'm not going quietly. So he wrote this book titled There Was a Country. No matter what you think about it, no matter your views about Achebe's views as expressed in this book, it is a book to read. There Was a Country. And for 40 years, Achebe kept silent on the Biafra War. And then just before departing this world, he exploded in this very controversial must-read book. Well, I'm not sure time permits me to share with you more titles, but I will be back to share with you the rest of my, let me call them top 21 books on Nigerian history, my own recommended, books. Well, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Let's start from something that sums up what you've written in this book. In this author's opinion, both country and army have suffered as a result of the latter's involvement in politics. And there is plenty of evidence to back this up, both before 1999 and the years since. I think this sums up the book pretty well, right?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the idea was to trace the evolution of Nigeria as a country, trace the evolution of the army, and do so in parallel, and then look at the interaction between the politics of a country and the Nigerian army, particularly the effects on both sides of the army's involvement in politics. And it's that process that led to the conclusion that you have just referred to. But beyond that, the fundamental reason for writing this book is that it's a history book. And I am a firm believer in the idea that if you do not know where you're coming from, it is almost impossible to work out where you're going. And that brings me back to the comment you made about your concerns about, which way Nigeria. And it is precisely actually because we need to be clear about where we're going. And in order to do that, we must not, absolutely not, repeat the mistakes of the past.
Just before we end the show today, let's enjoy this reading.
Hi everyone, I'm Adejoke Adeoshu, a legal practitioner and a writer. I go by the pen name of Sisi, Caro, and I'm the author of this amazing book, Oni and Maggots. Oni and Maggots is a book on Nigerians' politics Started from the second junta to the third junta, talked about the General Babangida regime, the Abacha regime, the MKO Abiola election and its annulment. More importantly, it discusses the EndSARS of the 2020, the year 2020, the COVID disease. Well, it's now in the form of a fiction, and so it encompasses so much more on politics, some on nature, and of course the beautiful relationship of my characters, Patrick and Dimeye. Right now, I want to read a portion of this book that discusses the defilement of the male gender, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Patrick and his housemates were leaving the house when he saw Miss Adams slip a foot which almost caused a fall. Patrick, being close by, moved swiftly to support her hand, thereby averting the fall. "Oh, thank you, Patrick. These shoes are not as firm as before," she said while checking the sole of the left shoe for a visible reason for the slip. When she saw nothing, she stood upright and continued their journey from the boarding facilities back to the academic premises. "Come to the laboratory at break time," she said. "All right, ma'am." And Patrick went to the laboratory to meet Miss Adams. "Patrick, I've been expecting you. I want you to help arrange these test tubes. When do you have my subjects?" "Tuesday next week," he responded and began arranging the tubes while Miss Adams walked at the inner room. "You're so meticulous with that. Well done," she said, now standing beside Patrick, who did not know when she got there. He smiled and arranged the last sets. "Your break is almost over. You should start going." "Thank you, Pat," she said, and drew him into an embrace. "You are just like my baby brother." And so, like a big sister, she found reasons to be kind to him. Light refreshments on some days, lunch on other days, and body spray on another. Patrick even met a birthday card and wrapped gifts on his bed after school hours on his birthday. The card was signed with love, M.A. He knew the sender. On one of those visitations, Miss Adams called him into the inner room and asked him to sit on the chair while she stood in front of him. "Hold me," she said. Patrick, puzzled, obeyed and held her hand. Before he could gather his thoughts, Miss Adams sat on his laps and pinned him, leaving no room for escape. Controlled by ugly rooted emotions which found their expressions on her face, she kissed his face and neck and pushed her hands into his privates. Patrick, still in shock, began to feel an alien enveloping him and Miss Adams moving or dancing or hopping on him for what seemed like forever. Finally, when Miss Adams' excitement had subsided, she stood up, adjusted her skirt and told Patrick to dress up. Patrick stood up, felt a little dizzy, raised his hand towards his head and could not move for some seconds. So Miss Adams dressed him up, went to her shelf, brought out a can of milk, poured some in a cup and gave Patrick to drink. "Sorry, dear, you will be fine," she said. Patrick left the laboratory saddened of how his pride was shredded and his innocence stolen. He had told no one about this. Whenever he saw Miss Adams, he broke into a sweat. He went for her classes, and while others saw an amiable teacher who was as sweet as honey, all he saw in her was a woman spewing maggots. This happened about a year ago, but he never cried. He refused to cry. But now with the rape incidents and the discussions, something let loose in him that he could not control. It ran through his bowels and made the grass ugly. It flowed in his hot tears, making him quiver until he let out a distressful cry. It had dawned on him. He was raped. He was a victim. Miss Adams was a prey. Hi everyone. I just read an excerpt from my book that talks about sexual harassment amongst boys.
And this is where we have to end the show. As always, we'll be delighted to get your feedback through any of our social media platforms displayed on your screen. My name is Olakunle Kasumu. Remember, one great book can change your life. Bye-bye.